Okay, well, it's 2 o'clock, so I just want to take a minute to thank everyone for coming today. I'm Anna. I'm actually the president of the Graphic Design League at LaSalle. Let's let Professor Zimakov take it away and talk about his amazing work.
Thank you so much, Anna. I really appreciate it. Yeah, let's get started. So amazing to see all those people coming in from all over the world. I just mentioned that. We have people. We have my students. We have people who, my dear friends who I went to college with, and I have some of my fellow printmakers, artists that I greatly admire. So this is the pressure is on. This is going to be. This is going to be interesting. Hopefully, I will not let you down. How's my voice coming through? Is everything okay? Can you guys hear me good? Okay. So first of all, thank you, GDL, the Graphic Design League of LaSalle University, for hosting the talk and allowing me this opportunity to talk about my work. Thank you, Professor Stephen Fisher. Thank you to all my colleagues at LaSalle University and School of Communication and the Arts. It's amazing to be part of this very friendly and unique family. And thank you for LaSalle University for providing me with a sabbatical leave, which is heaven for all instructors and all professors. You get a whole semester to work on your professional projects and advance your craft and art. So let's see. Today, I want to, there's a lot of things to talk about, and I'll focus on the things that I've worked during the last fall in 2020. And I will talk about the process of creating and coming together, putting together, printing a limited edition book based on the poem by Lewis Carroll called Haddocks' Eyes. I will talk about the Haddocks' Eyes remix project, where basically I took elements and things from the book and remixed them, reinterpreted them in a different way and had a little bit of fun with that. And then if time permits, I will talk about some of the other things that were happening and that are happening in the studio right now. And that's a series of new works, new projects that might or might not end up in books someday. One disclaimer is the work that I was doing in the fall with my sabbatical. I was always envisioning to present that to you guys as a show in the Whitman Gallery, following in the footsteps of Professor Stephen Fisher, who, after his sabbatical project, put on this amazing show of work. And my work is also, it's very tactile. I'm a printmaker, so it's all about the smell of the ink. It is about the touch of the paper. So, but we're living in interesting times, and the schedule of the Whitman Gallery is all over the place at the moment. We have to postpone some shows. So, but I'm hoping that at some point I will be able to present that work in person as well. So this will be a nice introduction into the process and into what I'm doing. Disclaimer number 2, we are recording this. So I do appreciate you guys being on mute. Thank you so much. I will leave some time at the end for questions. So if you can put them in the chat, or later you can unmute and ask me after I'm done. I will be showing a lot of images, details and things like that. So full screen mode would be ideal if you got that. Just a little friendly suggestion here. But with that being said, let's get rolling. I am broadcasting live from my studio. This is me on daily and nightly basis. That's the place where I spend most of my time in this case, printing, sometimes drawing, sometimes carving, or gluing, binding, putting things together, making things happen. We're in Wayland, Massachusetts. It's about 30 minutes from downtown Boston, and it's a converted garage. So it took me a couple of years to get things organized, ordered, insulate things properly, get proper shelving, good stereo system, which is very important for any type of creative work. The table right here that I'm sitting at was donated to me by Professor Ken Calhoun, and I'm very grateful to him for that. That's my little Nolan proofing printing press over there. And those are the completed spreads from the book that I will be talking about here in a minute. So that's a little bit just to give you a sense of where we are at right now. In the following little video, I want to introduce you to the process of carving and printmaking. I work in a technique called relief printmaking. A lot of you are familiar with this. Some of you have taken my printmaking class before, so you know very well what's involved. But this will be a quick little introduction. There's going to be a little bit of music that's provided by my dear friends, San Francisco band Varona.
Remember to say oh, I don't know if you stay. Remember to say hey, let's play. Either way, I'll ask someone who prays to pray all the way. You have the strength to play that old game.
Some of those things that I do in my studio do end up in books. And some of the things that I do here are specifically for books. They're book commissions, illustration work. And most recently, let me see if I can minimize the window just a little bit to make it a little better. How's that? Can you still see things all right? Good. So most recently in 2020, I've completed a project for, those are illustration for Kenneth Graham's classic children's book, The Wind in the Willows. This was done for my friend who commissioned is Chet Postotnik. He's actually printing those as we speak, and the book is going to be coming out from Mad Parrot Press. The other project that was recently done was a series of illustrations for Ray Bradbury's book, Something Wicked This Way Comes. And the book that's done, that was published by Centipede Press, and that arrived just the other week in my house. So that's always great to see the book finally come together and see the final product. In my illustration work, I do all sorts of things, from little tiny vignettes or illustrations that go on the covers to a heavy duty commission where I'm doing 40, 50 illustrations for one book. And it's a very rewarding, very interesting, very exciting field to work in. And I want to say it's a very collaborative field. So I'm working with art directors, editors, publishers, even the marketing team sometimes gets involved, working with authors. So, there's always, it's a process, right? You do a sketch, draft, revisions, until you reach the final stage. So I wanted to mention that because what I'm going to be talking about today is a little different. So once in a while, I also create my own books where I'm completely in charge of the whole process. And those are called limited edition artists' books. And that's where I basically take an idea and run with it from start to finish. This is the Book of Sounds that was created few years back, and that was based on my own little poems. And the illustration work and the colors were all about the sounds and what they might or might not look like. Another project was that I completed in London some time ago was The Diary of a Madman, based on a short story by Nikolai Gogol. And this was a really interesting project because it allowed me to take that short story and really experiment with typography. The book is written in a form of a diary, and the main character loses his mind throughout the book. So typographically, I tried to portray that and depict that. And of course, make the type work with images in the best way possible. And this was all printed by hand with letterpress. So everything was set by hand. I used a couple of presses to print this, and I used the original lino cuts that I carved. Then I bound the book. And those are really, exciting projects because you are orchestrating the whole experience. You are in charge of the whole experience here. It's like a theater play. You develop you figure out what the characters will look like, figure out the setting, the scenery, the props. Of course, you figure out the rhythm and the flow of the book. Some pages are minimal, some pages are busy. You shape the experience of the viewer completely. And you're responsible for the concept, the drawings, the type, as well as the binding, selection of paper, and finally, last but not least, networking, marketing, and getting it out there into the world and exhibiting it and presenting it to the wider audience. So I was looking for the next project to tackle, and I've always liked the nonsensical verse. That has always appealed to me from my childhood. And this is a very quick Encyclopedia Britannica definition. They're humorous or whimsical verses, and they're absurd. They don't make any sense. They don't have any particular morals to them, or if anything, the morals are completely reversed in most cases. The pioneers of the genre were Edward Lear and Lewis Carroll. And those are some of the folks that I've been researching quite a bit. Of course, if you really trace the history of nonsense books and nonsense prose and verses, that dates, centuries and centuries back. But in the 18th century, late 19th century, Edward Lear and Lewis Carroll really brought that to the forefront. And as I was thinking what project to tackle and what text to base my next book on, I was reading Edward Lear and Lewis Carroll. Edward Lear is absolutely fantastic. He wrote those funny limericks. I remember reading them as a kid. I remember my grandparents reading them to me as a kid, and I found them to be absolutely hilarious. And I got into that much more than other fairy tales that had morals or, certain lessons to them. This was just fun. And the thing about illustrating Edward Lear, it's tricky because he was an amazing illustrator himself. He illustrated most of his poems. So he would write, and that would inspire him to do the illustration, or vice versa. So it was hard to do it justice. Why do something that is already done so well? Lewis Carroll, on the other hand, has been illustrated by many illustrators before and artists, but he, I thought that I can add something here to the table. And I was reading one day one of his poems. It's called, in this case, it's called The White Knight's Song. Sometimes it's called Haddocks' Eyes, and sometimes it's called I'll Tell Thee Everything I Can. And he actually wrote several variations of the poem. And it kind of hit me right there that this would be a perfect project. It's very short. It's 2 pages long. I'll tell thee everything I can. There's little to relate. I saw an aged man sitting on a gate. Who are you, aged man? I said, and how is it you live? And his answer trickled through my head like water through a sieve. He said, I look for butterflies that sleep among the wheat. I make them into mutton pies and sell them in the street. I sell them unto men, he said, who sail on stormy seas. And that's the way I get my bread, a trifle, if you please. But I was thinking of a plan, and so on and so forth. So what's happening here is it's constant back and forth between the narrator and this old man sitting on a fence that he encounters. And this was perfect to me because with the Diary of a Madman, I had just one narrator to really focus on. Here, this gave me great opportunity to deal with two voices going on and playing off each other. This is a type of thing where you read the poem, takes you 3 minutes to read it. It took me maybe another half an hour or an hour to jot down the very basic sketches, kind of figure out the main flow of the book. Very, very basic, very initial. I've changed this, many, many times over. But then it takes you another year or two to actually create the final finished product, because the process of actually printing, finalizing things, carving things, printing things, setting the type is very involved. But this gives you an idea of how it all started and how it all came together. So in my studio, I have a wall which is dedicated to sketches and drafts. And of course, right away, I started mocking things up. So from the sketch stage, you go to the mock-up stage, and those I take them down, I revise them, I put them back up. It's very important for me to see things all as a whole, especially when you're working on a book. Computer files are great, but you cannot see them all at the same time. And then I started to come up with characters. I started sketching things. What would the old man look like? What would the narrator look like? How would his hair look? And as I mentioned, it is very much like you're in charge of a theater production or a movie production. You're trying to bring this whole experience to the audience. And I started carving. I actually made a few pages a couple of years ago, and I started bringing those couple of pages to the book fairs and exhibiting that along with my other print work. And, it was getting really good response. People were really interested by it, and they were asking me, well, when are you going to be done with it? When is it going to be finished? And I would say, by the spring, by the winter, or next year for sure. But there was just, other projects got in the way. And besides, at that point, I wasn't completely happy with what I had. So the sabbatical comes along, and that allowed me to really focus on the work and produce something that I'm pretty happy with at the moment. After the carving is done, it is printed. Sometimes I recarve images. The thing about carving a lino is that if you mess up, you either have to somehow change the image or you have to start over, because once you're always working with the negative, you're carving the negative space, and once, just one slip of the hand and the whole image can get messed up. So then I started to, I figured that I wanted this to be two colors. One is being this gray, or not gray, sepia ghost tone, and the other one being the rich black tone. And I started to come up, started to put things in templates and create registration plates. Every printmaker that I know does it differently. This is my approach, and in a minute I'll show you how I use that on the press to align the two images together, the two colors together. You got to keep things organized as you're working on a project like this one. So I would, my one color plate would be, everything would be in those nice, neat little folders. And you see here for one of the pages on the top, that's the plate for the sepia tone. And on the bottom, you see that is the plates for the black image, or the black impression. And when you put those two together, ideally they should align exactly how you want them. And that's where registration is extremely important. And but sometimes, as I will mention earlier as well, misregistration can be a beautiful thing as well. And then once you figure that out, it's a matter of printing multiples. The beauty of printmaking is that you can do multiple copies, and when you're working on a book, you make an edition. I've decided that my edition would be 33. So I'm making 33 books. So I'm printing 50 pages. 32 will go for the book. I'll have another 15 as just loose prints that I can sell or give out or have at exhibitions. And then you always need a few prints just for trial and error in case things don't go right. Because it's one page, but I'm printing, on this one page, I'm printing 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 times on it, depending on how much typography I'm using and depending how much lino I'm using. And this is actually a little process video that I'll talk over. That is me printing that under layer, that ghost print that I was talking about. Another thing that I started doing during my sabbatical project was documenting things. And I think that's very important for any artist. And that's something that helps people to understand your work a little better. This is my Nolan proofing press. It's type high, so you can actually use letterpress and you can put wooden letters or lead letters on it. And around those, you can also print linos. With the linos, you just need like a masonite board or something to raise the base a little bit. I am using a double-sided sticky film here so that when my plate is on the base, it's there and it's not going to move anywhere. And then there comes the job of inking. And hand inking can be quite tricky because you got to ink things very evenly. For the ghost print, I am hand inking things. For the main black image, I will be using Vandercook presses, and those actually ink the plates for you. Then I put the registration template on top of my lino. That's how I align the papers just where I need it to be. And with the ghost print, the way I get the ghost print is that the first pass through the press, I discard or use for something else, and I print the main image on the second run through the press. That second paper is just there for backing so that the image prints nicely. There's enough pressure. And ta-da, there you have it. This is the first impression. That'll go on a page, on the spread, that will go inside of a book. Now, to print the black ink plate, I go to Charlestown, Massachusetts, which is just north of Boston. And this is where I mentioned this earlier, if you were joining us a little before our start time. This is the location in the stove factory. That's the location of Reflex Letterpress. It's a print studio that's run and operated by Ted Ollier. And I have a membership there. There's about 5 or 6 of us that get to use the presses. There's a schedule, and you can set up certain times. And I know Ted also does amazing workshops on letterpress. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, Ted Ollier at Reflex Letterpress would be the man for you. And you'll see what I am. See, in this case, I am aligning the black ink lino, and this is the beast. This is Vandercook number 4 proofing press. Those are very heavy, quite expensive nowadays. I'm not lucky enough to have one of those, so I'm using one at Reflex. There are a lot of advantages to a Vandercook, and I know some of you on this conversation are using Vandercrooks quite a bit in your own studio. But the main advantage is it prints things, it inks the plate for you, so you can create multiple impressions fairly fast. So right now I'm going through the first pass, and that inks the plate. And then I register my paper. Those presses are also great for registration. Once you figure out and set everything up exactly where you want it, it's going to print on the same, exact space every time. And what I do is I double print or I overprint a lot, just to get this really solid, rich black. And with those presses, you can get, exact accuracy. So one impression can go on the press, through the press twice, and it will be just accurately in place, one on top of the other. This is a shot I'm very proud of here. It's a top view. I got a little slider camera that kind of slides above, but it'll give you a view from another point of, from another perspective of how those are printed. So here we are. At this point, I got two of my colors down, and it is time to move to typography. Typography was tricky for this project. At first, I wanted to set everything with metal type, with lead type. And I was running around Massachusetts. There's several places that still sell cases and of lead type. And I bought a whole, I think over a period of half a year, I accumulated a whole a type cabinet of things that I would possibly use for this project. And I tried out quite a few things, and it just, I keep wanting to expand the project and make it even more exciting and even more interesting. And I found that the lead type was limiting me in some ways. So I decided to go digital, which can be considered a sacrilege in the letterpress world, but I think it works, especially since, in my opinion, it's all about how good I can make the book visually and how interesting I can make it, and how I can really make that experience as best as possible. So I have started to play with digital typefaces. I've decided to, it's time to decide what typeface I wanted to use for the narrator and what type I wanted to use for the aged man. For the narrator, I went through several ideas and several versions, and I've settled upon a Cabell. I like the eccentricity of it. It's very straightforward sans serif type, but those G's or the tittle on the I give you this little fun thing that I thought would fit really good with the book and with the narrator speaking. The aged man was a little trickier because I wanted to really project his eccentricity and his nonsensical abilities through the typography. So I decided not to settle on just one typeface, but actually use a combination of several and design them in such a way that several typefaces go together like little puzzle pieces. And I've settled upon Caslon, Gil Sans, Gaudi, Trajan, Futura, and I've threw in a few other ones, more kind of weird, obscure ones, Caviar, Din, and Porter. And I used the combination of those typefaces to set my type for that in Adobe Illustrator. So this is a time-lapse video of me working on one of those pages. So this becomes very tedious. You basically go into every letter, you try it with different typefaces, you see what fits best, what works best. Then you go back in, you zoom in on each of the letters and tweak it around just a bit. Maybe you move the angle, maybe you actually distort a part of the letter itself very subtly in, not obvious ways. But you're trying to make those things fit together in the best way possible. I think I was gonna extend the bottom part of the E there. Yep. And then I decided against that and left it as it is. And you see those, little connections that are starting to happen between the letters, the ligatures and whatnot. So I took quite a bit of freedoms here to mess with the type, rearrange it, and actually alter the letters themselves. And for all you folks in my typography classes, what we talked about last week, all those rules of kerning, leading, word spacing, they still apply, but in a more experimental, perhaps not traditional ways. But I'm still very, very conscious about the positive space, the negative space. That E really bugged me there. It took me quite a few tries until I got it exactly where I wanted it to be. And let's see, I think, yep, here we are. And this is the completed page. What I would do after I completed the Illustrator file, I would send it to a place in New York called Boxcar Press. And they create polymer plates from digital files. So it's a little plastic looking thing that looks like this. It's polymer, but you have the type is raised up. So it's like it's embossed. So you can actually put this on the press, as you see down there, and it will ink it and print it. And you can print it just as if you would lead letters. And then after the pages started to come together, it was a matter to decide on what binding to use. And I like the idea of a French or accordion binding because it allows you to have the book open like you normally would have it in a book, but it also allows you to spread the pages and create a whole panorama. And that's also quite great for, especially for exhibitions. You can, kind of position it however you want in the gallery so the viewer can see the whole book at the same time. So at this point, I'd like to run through the pages of the book. I've talked a lot about the techniques and the process of putting this together, the technical aspects of things. At this point, I want to focus a little bit on the concepts behind each of the illustrations and designs and the illustrations that went into that. So keep in mind, you're looking at spreads. So you have the left page and the right page. So imagine that, invisible line there in the middle. This is the first spread. It's an introduction to the book. So I wanted to focus on the main character here. That main character was the old man, and he's there on the left, and in the background, it's a sepia. It's a reproduction of the same fence, but it's enlarged. Kind of hint at the psychedelia that will come in the book later. And the first page is the narrator saying, I'll tell you everything I can, asking this old man questions. I played around with when the narrator actually narrates, it's just cabal set in irregularly. But then when he's speaking, I did make certain intonations and certain accents and made some letters larger, some smaller to kind of channel the voice of that guy. And then the next spread, the old man replies. He said, I look for butterflies that sleep among the wheat. I make them into mutton pies and sell them in the street. And at this point, I'm really starting to have some fun with the imagery here. So he's talking about butterflies. So I figured, why not make the old man himself into a butterfly? Why not? Everything goes. And this is the beauty of creating an artist book, because I am the director here. I am the art director as well as the illustrator and designer. So the only thing that I got to consider is that Lewis Carroll wouldn't mind. And I hope he doesn't. But he also got to realize that his work has been in the public domain for a long time now. And we do have some artistic freedom to reinterpret that in some way or shape. Right, here we get back to the narrator. He's getting pretty frustrated at the old man at this time because the narrator is trying to ask him a simple question. The old man replies in this gibberish. So he's starting to yell a bit. Lewis Carroll does mention whiskers in this part, which is a great opportunity to throw a cat into the book. And I think every book should have at least one cat in it, just because they're awesome. One other thing about this page is you see down there in the bottom, and thumped him on the head. And as an illustrator and as a designer, I try not to overstate the obvious or even state the obvious. If anything, I try to work the other way. So, thumping somebody on a head is a big, powerful, forceful move. So I intentionally made the type very small. And the actual image of the punch, that pounding, happens off to the side. It's cropped, so you don't really see it right away. You see it's just like a secondary thing that happens there. All right, at this point, the old man replies again speaking in nonsense, gibberish. He's talking about Roland's Macassar oil, which was back in the 19th century, this was a hair product that people would use to get their hair done. And some more visual freedoms here. So the narrator is getting this Roland's Macassar oil treatment. And why not throw in a chimp in there? I thought that might add something to the story. So at this point, I am really messing with Lewis Carroll's narrative. I'm not messing with it, but I'm adding to it. All right. So there's almost like a parallel story that's starting to happen with a chimp. Lewis Carroll never mentioned a chimp or any type of a monkey in the book, but that chimp will reappear again a little later. In this case, the punch is very forceful because I did want to bring some accent to that and bring some attention to this. Notice that butterfly is stopping by and peeking in here from the previous page, or from a couple of pages ago. At this point, the narrator is quite annoyed with the old man. He proceeds to shake him. The illustration, the image is pretty straightforward, but what I wanted to do here is play with the notion of scale, because so far you're like, okay, those are normal, regular looking people, same, normal size people. But here, what if, you don't know, maybe the old man is very tiny and the narrator is normal, or the other way around. The old man is regular size and the narrator is a giant. So all those things just to kind of play with the perception of the viewer, the perception of somebody who's going to be reading the book. Then the old man talks about hunting, and that's the part where he hunts for Haddocks, eyes. And I was thinking about how should I introduce this idea of hunting. I looked at images of rifles, bow and arrows, and then I came across this practice of shooting bow and arrow with your feet. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced that, but I spent a few hours on YouTube just watching those videos, being quite fascinated by the whole thing. I didn't know that was a thing. And it's a sport. I mean, there are competitions, and I thought that'd be perfect for the book. Why not throw that in there? So the old man is using his feet to hunt the Haddocks' eyes. Here, Lewis Carroll introduces a crab, very, kind of very mildly. He just mentions that in one sentence. I sometimes dig for buttered rolls and set limed twigs for crabs. I sometimes search for grassy knolls for wheels of handsome cabs. So you see the wheels there. The old man is riding the wheel, but it's that crab that I really get fascinated with. And I was so excited about it that I figured I should really give that crab a centerfold. So the next page, you have the crab drinking some wine, or actually drinking the narrator's noble health. And that's the way he gave a wing, by which I get my wealth, and very gladly will I drink your honor's noble health. So again, this is very much open for interpretation, and this is something that I've decided might work. At this point of the book, there's a lot of drinking going on. It's wine, it's somebody's health. So the page becomes a little off and a little tipsy, if you will. And, at this point, we notice that the narrator is also being quite nonsensical himself. So the narrator is saying, I heard him then, for I had just completed my design to keep the Menai bridge from rust by boiling it in wine. And you see that scenery of that bridge boiling in the background as the narrator and the old man are having a nice little drinking picnic type of a situation. And mostly from this point on, we hear from the narrator. Now he is all gibberish and he is all nonsensical. Notice some of the elements appear from before, like that Macassar oil bottle. And then down at the bottom, this is another little device that I use quite a bit, or if I drop upon my toe a very heavy weight down there on the right. We all know what that feels like. We have all experienced it. So there's no point of drawing or printing or creating an image of somebody dropping a heavy weight. It's already there in writing. So why not make it a feather? Kind of play with the perceptions a bit. Okay, and here we get to the last 3 pages, the last 3 spreads of the book. And I've skipped a few pages just for the sake of time, but there are more inside. But the last 3 pages are always very important to me because that's the grand ending, the grand finale. And you want to end on a strong note. At the same time, you don't want to overload the viewer because the viewer has already been exposed to so much throughout looking at the narrative. So 3rd to last page, I'm not introducing any new images. Those are all repurposed, resampled things. So you see the haddock, you see the chimp, you see the wheat there on the left, and you see the old man cropped. That's from that spread where he was being shaken up. And you see the wheels of the cabs. I worked so much throughout the book with type and image all in combination. So I figured the last 2 pages should be all about type. And the very last one should be all about imagery, or at least 95% of it. So at this point, there's very minimal things going on image-wise, but there's quite a bit of things going on as far as typography goes. And this is really a summary of the narrator and his impression of that old man. He's remembering him. They parted their ways, but I weep, for it reminds me so of that old man I used to know, whose look was mild, whose speech was slow, whose face was very like a crow, whose hair was whiter than the snow, with eyes like cinders all aglow, who seemed distracted with his woe, who rocked his body to and fro as if his mouth were full of dough and muttered mumblingly and low, who snorted like a buffalo. So at this point, I was thinking, what image should I put there? And I've decided against putting any images there because that breathing room was absolutely necessary, in my opinion. He's talking so much, he's giving you so much visuals. So at this little point on the bottom right, you as a viewer make up your own visual. And the last page is all imagery, just that last word to finish the poem, that summer evening long ago, sitting on a gate. So we're back to where we started. It's the narrator reminiscing. The old man is, as opposed to the very first page, old man is not on the fence anymore. He's kind of fallen down. He's looking very much like a crow. And the narrator is sort of looking at him and partying with him in some way. So I hope that explained the flow and what I meant by some of the images. And there's more, right? I mean, there's so much, that I put there, but I think I kind of hit the main points to get you a little familiar with what goes into orchestrating such a project. And then at the end of the day, what you end up with after all the printing, carving, printing, you end up with stacks of paper for each of the spreads, all numbered. And there you have those 50 of the pages. Those are stacks of the master files, as I call them. So that's where all the lino lives. That's the actual lino. There are hundreds of pieces of linos that went into this, about, I would say, 50-foot roll that I used up, like a 50 by 1 foot roll or more. So you got to keep things organized. And then I also save my lino shavings. I don't know if anybody else does this, but to me, it's a little souvenir after a project that I've completed. It's all the negative space that was not in the book. And I have boxes of it. Some boxes are smaller, some boxes are larger, depending on how big the project is. So how are we doing? Am I going okay? Do you want me to slow down? Want me to speed up? Are things okay? Things are going well so far? Good. All right. So yeah, want to talk for about maybe another 10 minutes, and then I want to open it up to questions. So as this book was getting completed, and it's actually, the thing is, the pages are done, they're printed, but there's still so much to take care of, like the binding and, choosing what book cloth to use, what slipcase to create, what debossing to do on the cover. And actually, the binding process itself is quite tedious. So I'm figuring that out at the moment. So the whole completed book should be done sometime in the spring, I'm hoping within the next month or so. But as I was working on this book, what I was doing is in the studio, after I printed my page properly with everything aligning and everything registered, I just had some fun with overprinting. And in this case, I have a whole stack of, prints that, maybe they're off a little bit, that are just there for proofs. And I would take random prints and print them on the press with other plates, in combination with other plates. And it worked really interestingly, especially with typography. So there's quite a bit of repurposing, overlaying, collaging going on, completely unintentional. All right. So sometimes, the compositions are just perfect. Sometimes the compositions are just complete garbage. So it all depends. But this experimentation stage is extremely, extremely important. And that's how those things were starting to come together. Also, Adobe Illustrator somehow realized that I was doing those experiments and started to malfunction on several occasions. So when I was working on type, I would zoom in and out, the Illustrator would lag, and it would give me those weird ghost print fields that I would take screenshots of and also use them as little ideas. And out of those experimentations, I decided to create a whole series of posters based on what's in the book, but completely remixed. So if we're talking music, if the Haddocks Eyes is an album that I've recorded, this is a remix album. The positioning is different. It's vertical. And at this point, you're not really supposed to read the type or make any sense of the illustrations at all. It's all just a matter of placements and positioning things at different ways. And that's how those came about. And that's the size of them, just to give you a little bit of a perspective. So, some of those were printed. I am hoping to actually do maybe a whole series of posters, much larger, using silkscreen over the summer. But they live in this stage at the moment. Very important thing that I want to mention towards the end are all the little experiments that are happening in the studio as I'm working on any project. And I think that's something that is quite necessary for any printmaker, any artist, to keep things going, not just focus on one project, but, well, I don't know, I guess it depends on how you work. But to me, having multiple things going at the same time works really well. And doing those experiments might end up in the new project or the next project or the following one. So in this case, I would, get a bunch of new ink and just experiment with overlaying, having one color, second color, and seeing how those things will come together in the long run. And what would the third color be? And then I use some of those colors and some of those things on some of the prints that I'm producing later on. And then I have a sketch wall. And, any projects that I've been involved in, no matter what happens, I try to produce those little ideas and get them going. During the fall, I try to draw every night and create little ideas besides, the Haddocks size book. And those sketches end up on the wall. I don't use sketchbooks. Just for some reason, I tried them, and for some reason it just never clicked. So what I do is I just draw on, scrap pieces of paper or on napkins, and then I would enlarge them, draw over them again, and so on and so forth until things start to feel complete. Some of those whimsical, nonsensical ideas end up as final prints. Sometimes they just go into the ideas for later drawer that I might revisit later on. But it was very important for me to experiment with that as well and keep coming up with little ideas that I will use in my work down the road. And some of those sketches are just characters. Some of those sketches are complete scenes that might develop. Some of those sketches turn into little narratives that are taking shape right now as we speak in the studio. So, and it's all interrelated with Haddocks' eyes as well. It's not based on Lewis Carroll's work, but you see that butterfly man on the right, he's from the Lewis Carroll book. But the narrative here is completely different. And once I drew that image on the right, I thought, well, how did that fish get there on the table? Somebody had to catch it. And then now I'm thinking, what will happen after and after and after? And before you know it, there's a little visual, nonsensical narrative that's starting to take place. And sometimes I would get some inspiration to write a little poem based on that narrative as well. And maybe someday this will turn into a book project or two. And at this point, some of those sketches are turning into some of the prints and waiting to be finalized, editioned, and printed. And at this point, this is sort of still more completed, but still very much an idea wall. Maybe there would be a series of the prints. Maybe there'd be a series of little narratives, or maybe they will be bound in some type of a book. And that's very important, I think, to have going, because when you're working on a big project like the artist book, like the Haddocks size or something, or you're working on an exhibition, you always feel this, at least I do, you feel this emptiness at the end of the project, because you finish this massive amount of work, and what's going to happen next is the big question. And that's where you get into artist blocks and writer's blocks or what have you, and you're kind of stumbling around trying to find out what to do next. But when you have those little ideas going at the same time, that gives you quite a bit of material to work on, even after you completed the big project, maybe for years to come. Okay, I've talked for a while, almost an hour. That's a long time. I'm sure I'm forgetting some things, and I'm sure that, so hopefully some of those things I'll be able to talk about in the Q&A. But thank you for spending this hour with me so far. This has been really amazing. So let me stop the screen share and let me open it up to any questions that you might have for me.
Vladimir, there's a number of questions in the chat, but I wonder if we could just it's kind of hard to get through all to find them. So maybe people can just unmute and ask the
Sure,
questions
go
that
ahead.
they put in the
Anything
chat.
goes. Anything.
I really have to know, do you draw every single day? And what your approach to sketching is? Is it loose? Do you sketch in the style that your work is, or?
Thank you, Lynn. No, I wish I would have drawn every day. I try to draw every day. Sometimes I draw a lot. Sometimes just because of time, I skip a few days. But I try to sketch at least something or come back to a sketch that I've been working on daily basis. That's my hope, and that's kind of my goal. It doesn't always turn out that way. During the sabbatical, I did make it a point to really sit down and sketch things every day. When we are in the school session, and especially when I have other pressing projects going on, it doesn't turn out that way. My sketching process is all over the place. Sometimes it is, let me pull a few things here. So sometimes out of the blue, some characters would come to mind that I would draw. That's really not completed yet, but it might be at some point. Sometimes I would find a photograph that I find interesting, and then I draw right on top of that photograph. Or I would find a photograph and use one of the scans of my previous drawings to put things together in a computer digitally, print that out, and then maybe draw on top of that. So it really is all over the place when it comes to that. That's why, sketchbooks are tricky. Sketchbooks are very, they're very precious, right? Each page is, you're afraid to rip the pages out. In this case, there's, nothing, precious about the actual thing, because I can scan it in, print it out again, rework it, and so on and so forth.
Vladimir, your style is so distinctive, and it is so incredible. I'm a huge fan.
Thank you.
And I'm always curious, at what point in your life did you begin to draw like this, or has it always looked the way it does?
Oh, it's a good question.
I mean, if we pulled out drawings when you were 10 years old, would there be a similar look?
When I was 10 years old, there was a book. Actually, let's go back when I was 5 years old. There was a book that I absolutely was horrified by. It was a book of Northern Russian legends or something like that. The illustrations in the book were done in this very crude, forceful, black and white, brutal style. And as a kid, I was just like, I don't want to see this book. And I would hide it. My parents would hide it from me, but I would find it. And I was so intrigued by it. It's one of those things where you're attracted to something that you're scared of. And no matter how hard my parents would try to hide it, I would always find it. And I would look at it, and then they would hide it again, and I would find it. And of course, I had other children's books that I didn't really care much for. I did, but they weren't as important. And only years later, I realized that book was done in lino cuts using a very similar style that I've adopted. So there's something about that. Perhaps it was always there. But no, it's definitely, I tried a lot of, and I still do a lot of painting and drawing and ink. It's just what feels right at the moment, right? It feels, you sit down and that's what comes out. I'm trying to change things around, like I'm adding much more color to my work right now. But I think, crude looking people looking kind of weird and looking like bugs, that was always the case. My college instructor were telling me, Vladimir, I like your drawings a lot, your live drawings a lot, but all your people look like bugs. And at first I was kind of taken aback by that, but now I'm like, yeah, so what?
Perfect.
Professor Zimakov, I wanted to ask you about your creative process. It's great seeing your studio, and I noticed that I know how one form of creativity can help you break through in other forms of creativity. So I was wondering, seeing your musical instruments, do you ever get stuck on a drawing and you pick up a ukulele or your drums, stare at that photo while you're banging the drums, and then it just comes to you?
All the time, Jay. Yeah, that's what they're there for. The musical instruments in the studio are there for, they're therapy instruments. I'm not a good drummer. I'm not a good guitarist. All right, I'll tell that right now. But they're there to pick up and strum little things once in a while as I'm looking at the drawing. So you got it, right?
Yeah.
Same with drumming. When you're sitting like in a, carving things for hours, it's good to get out. This is my physical activity. This is my gym, right? This is like running for me, because you get to use your whole body, and it does get you in the whole different mindset. And again, let's not open the can of worms, because I can talk about music forever and the relationship between music and art. And when I was in my lecture, when I was talking about that this remix project, I mean, that's something that a lot of printmakers do, and kind of repurpose thing and see what accidents come out of this work, and finding the mistakes and embracing the mistakes. But as I was doing this, the work of Frank Zappa and David Bowie and Brian Eno in the Berlin period was very important to me, because they were doing the same thing. They were sampling, splicing things up, cutting and pasting things musically and lyrically. So I see the direct relation, and I listened to a lot of them as I was working on this. And I think that helped me a lot as well in the whole process. Thanks, Jay. Good to see you all the way from California.
What kind of paper do you tend to print on?
What's that? I'm sorry?
What kind of paper do you tend to print on?
Okay, Ray, thank you. I used to, for the most part, it's Reeves BFK and Stonehenge. Reeves BFK is the one for letterpress. Stonehenge is for silk screening mostly, and for drawing. But that's another thing that I need to experiment with more, because I do want to create certain things that that are more finer paper. But Reeves BFK has been the paper, my go-to paper so far. I like the feel and the flow of it. And I actually ended up reprinting this. I had this, this is just a few pages, a few spreads. And why I'm saying this project, is taking so long, because 2 years ago, I've printed a few pages, and I've printed them, quite a few. The first 4 spreads were all printed, edition in edition. And then I realized I just hate the paper that it's on. It was on Stonehenge. It wasn't bending just right. It was, when I was bending it was creasing. So have to reprint the whole thing again. So, that's why it's a trial and error constantly. And I hope to expand more paper. And Ray and Jill, I'll pick your brains on the paper. Maybe you'll give me some advice on that.
Do you do your own binding, or do you send it out?
I do, yeah. I do my own binding at this point, and hopefully getting better at it. But yeah, binding is another complete adventure. That's the binding and especially accordion binding, the gluing the pages and then putting them all together is right. So that's what I mean by the book being completed, when it's a complete package where you take it out. Some of the things are debossed on a page, and you have the end papers and everything working out. And that's what I mean by you can actually take a book and kind of view it as a normal book, or take it out and just fold it all out, spread it around, so it becomes a bit of an architectural piece, if you will. Or becomes a true artist object at this stage.
What are you connecting the pages to? How are you tabbing them?
Yeah, I'm
And with what material? I'm curious there.
Glue, archival glue. So I'm bending this part of the page.
Right.
Bending that, creasing it, and gluing it to the other.
Right.
Anything else, you guys? Do we have anything in the chat, Stephen?
Well, actually, I had another one. When did typography become important to you?
During my master's program at the Central St. Martin's. I mean, Kansas City Art Institute, as some of you on this meeting recall, I was an illustration major, illustration and graphic design major. So that planted the seeds for typography. But afterwards, I went, after KCI, I went to apprentice with the Russian artist Mikhail Shemyakin and got exposed to so many amazing books from his library that I decided to really pursue book publication and everything that's involved in creating a book, including images and typography. And I think, you know, when I show a project like this, I think it's a common notion to think that illustrations take most of the time. That's not the case sometimes. With the Diary of a Madman, or even with the Haddocks Eyes, typography took as much time as the illustrations themselves. To do it right, it does take some time, and it is a science. It is an odd science. It is a craft, philosophy, the whole thing. And the further you get into typography, the more there is to explore. So.
There's a technical question. What is the base made of that you glue the linoleum to?
I think it's masonite. It's just a piece of masonite from Home Depot. Yeah, like one of those big boards, 4x8 boards you get, and you cut them up. Now, when I'm printing linos, this works. When I'm printing type, obviously this doesn't work. With the lino, you got to have a with the type, you got to have a proper base because there's just so much detail and not enough flexibility. But with a lino cut, because the material is much softer, this has been working just fine.
I am wondering, have you ever envisioned working in a larger scale?
Sure, all the time. Look, this is actually why, I was always thinking about this as a show, as an exhibition, right? Because books are very intimate and very, they're meant to be looked at from like 12 inches or so, right? Now, I'm thinking, what if I make this print and make it like 20 feet high, right? I mean, imagine that. Imagine walking into something like that. Or imagine having this and his mouth, basically this dude is writing, but this is a door and you walk right through that door and inside something else. So, this is another interesting little detail. So this is one of the prints that I've been developing, also kind of based on a little nonsensical, absurd situation. But what I started doing is actually trying to recreate this drawing in sculptural terms. So that staircase, that's also kind of like a visual illusion. It's compressed, the perspective is compressed, but that would be going here. Then there'd be another stairs, and then figuring out the layers of the plates, actually have them in space and have them large size. That's something that I'm constantly thinking about and hoping to create that experience. And I think, summer would be a great opportunity to really dive into that.
But there, would you be working in multiple in the book, as a multiple, or would you be working more a stage set for a theatrical production?
Well, it'd be good to experiment with all of that, because I'm so used to working on 12 by 12 because of the lino restrictions. Right. I get linos in roll. The roll is 1 foot by 50 foot. So that was my restriction for a long time. And all my prints are fairly, they get fairly small. This is probably the largest, right? Well, sometimes they get larger in length or in depth, but it'd be great to overlay things and work on large presses as well. And as you know, Leonard, with Vandercooks, there's also restriction there because you get a certain amount of the base.
Yeah, unless you get like an SP25 or something like that.
I wish, maybe one day.
Yeah, I had one, but I sold it. But I'm sort of sorry.
I have one more question.
Yep.
When you depart from the literal, so you were talking about how you add, elements that are not in the text.
Yes.
How secure are you in making those decisions? Do you lose sleep at night? Do you really labor over that, or is that part of the freedom and the fun?
It's part of the freedom and the fun. I do have this not recurring, but I think I did have that dream once that made me think a little bit. It's all those authors that I've illustrated that are dead now, that they cannot speak for themselves, like Dostoevsky or Gogol or Lewis Carroll and Edgar Allan Poe. They all get together and they're sitting at this table in a room, and I walk in, and that's my judgment day of how well I did them justice, right? There is that, but at the same time, they were very creative individuals. I hope they would understand. I don't lose sleep over that. If anything, that's really liberating from, as I mentioned earlier, the illustration process is more, you have to be you can take your freedoms. I mean, you can stylistically but you have to be true. You have to do justice to the author. The author is the main person here. You, as an illustrator, you are just, you're supporting the work. So with this, with my own book projects, I don't have any problem of taking charge and just introducing something completely new to the plate. I think that's the point. That's the point, if anything.
And is there anything you can talk about in terms when the author is alive, or, if you're doing a client job, what that process is like and the concessions that you have to make, how badly do you take those?
Oh, so far I've been lucky, knock on wood, where that's always nervous. It's a nervous thing. I'm working on a project now that's based on the horror story by Peter Straub. I worked on a set of illustrations for Andre McKean, who is a living author in Brief Loves That Live Forever. That book should be coming out from Foolscap Press later this year. McKean was very particular about illustrations. When they asked him who is the illustrator, that's the first thing, when the publisher approached him about doing the illustrated book, he was like, well, who's going to be the illustrator? I need approval of all the illustrations. And I was sending him sketches and drafts and everything. And that's the nervous moment for me, of course. But so far, I had the luck of people liking what I do. And besides, at this point, I have a body of work that speaks for itself. So when the illustrators or when the authors or publishers see my work, they know what to expect, what I'm capable and not capable of, and how I can, tweak things around and make things work. So far it's been good, but it's like I said, illustration and graphic design, it is a process. It's a process. It's a collaborative process. Art directors, editors, publishers, authors, all those folks get involved. Marketing team, as I mentioned, I did this one cover. Everybody, the art director loved it. The publisher loved it. The marketing team got involved and said, well, that book is not going to sell with that cover. We need to switch things around. So that happens. Part of the job.
I found your Instagram over the weekend because Professor Granada actually was telling me about some of your other work, and I was interested in it. Mm-hmm. And actually, me and my boyfriend were looking at it, and he happened to make the comment that was like, the style was very reminiscent almost of the graphics in Mouse, if you know that graphic novel. Of course. And I wonder if you pull some inspiration from that, maybe. Yeah,
Art Spiegelman is a big inspiration. That's the Mouse creator, and there are quite a number of, especially graphic novels, has inspired me quite a lot. And comic book artists of the 60s and the underground comic book artists, I think I get inspired by comics a lot, and what was happening with, look at my, got the whole Robert Crumb anthology here. This is all dedicated to graphic novels and the works of, Lynn Ward was another amazing one, another amazing artist who created graphic novels. And this was my inspiration, huge inspiration. Edward Gorey is another one, of course. Art Spiegelman. I mean, I think the idea of a graphic novel, graphic narration, especially wordless graphic narration, is really attracts me quite a bit. And I hope to explore that further. But of course, Art Spiegelman, Maus, yeah, those are all, the foundational blocks. Thank you, Lauren. Dylan, you had...
That was amazing. And one thing that I really took away from that is the fact that you were documenting everything. I think I want to start doing that, honestly, documenting like the process of what I do, so I can look back at it and even like study my own work. And you should this was, I wanted to really get into it for a long time, but now, you have the Instagram and the Facebook stuff, but documenting it in forms of, and then putting it up on a blog or a website, nowadays that's essential for any artist or designer, I think, because you really have to, there's so much going on and people really need to establish an intimate relationship with your work. And the only way they can do it from another side of the world is by looking at the insights into your work. So, get a good camera, get into editing, shooting, all that stuff, and that'll help a lot. I would say it's my advice for sure. Sounds good.
I think that's so super important. I'm in the tea business, and I talk about this all the time. You want to drink or eat food that's created by a person, and if you know that person, that experience of eating that food is different.
For sure.
When Vlad, this has been amazing because now when I read that Wind in the Willows, which hopefully I'll have in a couple months, I've heard.
Yeah.
I can't wait to read that book and see your illustrations. Seeing the illustrations of an artist that I know, and now I have a lot more insight into your creative process.
Yep.
That's going to make the experience of reading that book and seeing those images very different than, I might love the images, but I have no idea of the person behind those images or the author behind the book. A very different thing. And that's part of what I love and when I blog about books and the experience of reading a book. Thank you so much for doing this. It's been amazing.
Jay, thank you. I hope to see you in San Francisco soon.
Yeah, I'll be seeing you next Codex whenever it happens.
I think some students may have to move along to other classes, but but I think, if you want to hang out and visit and keep talking, that's...
I'll hang out for a bit for sure. If you have any questions, but thank you so much for joining me in this journey. This has been amazing. Thank you. And I'll see some of you in class, and I hope to connect with a lot of you. I haven't seen some folks for such a long time, especially from the Kansas City. Tim is here from San Francisco. Look at that. Geez.
Great to see you again.
Oli is here from London. From England, right? Yeah. Wow, you guys, this has been amazing. Screenshot.
Look what we have in the back here. Oh, you cannot see it because it's so dark.
My piece there in England.
It's really bad lighting, but it's your piece, and we love you so much.
Oh, thank you, Olya. Thank you. It means a lot to me, you guys. Thanks so much. Hey, Brian.
I'm curious to know with World Topsy-Turvy, with COVID and Codex not happening until 2022, are there any current or plans coming up to be able to display or exhibit the book?
Not at the moment. I think the book fairs, the Codex, and showcasing something around Boston would be a great option, and presenting the work at the university's gallery at some point. But as you mentioned, Codex. What Scott is mentioning is the Codex International Book Fair. That's one of the biggest book events with that. I've attended it, I believe, maybe 8 times already. It happens every 2 years, and I have a table and I present my work. And that has not been happening because of COVID. And there are other international exhibitions that are not happening. And but I mean, we're hoping, right, that we'll be back to normal soon. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amen.
That's the plan. So,
all right. Well, I have to move along to another meeting, but thank you, Vladimir. This is incredible.
Thank you, Stephen.
Wonderful job.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Yeah, and I guess we'll have this available as a recording at some point as well if somebody has missed it or would want to have it. I mean, I don't know. I got to listen back to it. I might. If I don't like my voice, it's going to be trashed. It's been a blast. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.